Okay, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Kyle King, I'm the Managing Director of Capacity Building International, and welcome to our next webinar in our TEAMS, the International Emergency Management Society webinar series for 2021 with the University of Manchester, and we are going to talk about the future of emergency management. So just a few administrative remarks before we get started and before we begin the discussions. And this is the 19th of 24 events we've actually conducted this year. And that's just for the team side of the house. And actually, University of Manchester has conducted a wide range of series of events as well that you should actually check out. They're very good. And we've had, from our side, we've had 1,577 attendees in 66 nations. And so just a few quick points. Just let us know where you're joining from, and let us know in the chat. And also, as we go through the panelist discussions today, and if you have any questions, just use the Q&A feature, because that's where we can also record the questions and print those out later on and then have those for record. So, and we have a few more webinars going out through the rest of the year. And so coming up next after this series that we close out with the University of Manchester, then we're going to be moving into Smart Cities Disaster Response Project, the Impetus Project, which is sponsored by the EU. And we have data science and COVID response, and then we're going to be talking about technology and emergency management. But today we really wanted to focus on the future of emergency management, and that is where we have a very unique panel today, which I am very excited about, which is going to have a series of speakers from a wide range of and diverse backgrounds. And that is where we are actually, I think it's going to have a great discussion today to build up on our last discussion that we had on our second webinar just a couple of weeks ago. And so today we're joined by Kyle Overly. So Kyle Overly is an experienced practitioner and educator who is currently the Director of Disaster Risk Reduction at the Maryland Emergency Management Agency. In this capacity, he's responsible for leading 5 agency branches and programs, including hazard mitigation, risk analysis and recovery, public assistance, communications and outreach, and non-governmental services. As a member of MEMA's senior leadership, he assists with shaping the direction of emergency management policy in Maryland and direction of emergency management and directing the agency towards realizing its overarching vision to shape a resilient Maryland where communities thrive. In addition, we're joined by Professor Lucy Easthope, who is a leading authority on recovering from disaster. For over 2 decades, she has challenged others to think differently about what comes next after tragic events. She is a passionate and thought-provoking voice in an area that few know about, which is emergency planning. However, in the time of COVID-19 pandemic, her work has become decidedly more mainstream. Her book, The Recovery Myth, was published in 2018, and her next, When the Dust Settles, is published by Hodder in March 2021. She is a professor of practice of risk and hazard at the University of Durham, where she co-founded the After Disaster Network, as a fellow in mass fatalities and pandemics at the Center for Death and Society, University of Bath, and research affiliate at the Joint Center for Disaster Research, Massey University, New Zealand. Next, we have Jessica Jensen, who is an associate professor in the Department of Emergency Management at North Dakota State University. She is among the first doctoral degree holders in emergency management in the United States. Like most academics, Professor Jensen has a research agenda. She studies a range of topics central to the practice of emergency management by examining relevant scholarship, collecting data through work with practitioners in the field, and exploring policy. Her work has been featured at conferences and in a variety of scholarly journals, articles, and book chapters. Professor Jensen's subject matter expertise includes disaster recovery, such as individual and household recovery, nonprofit participation in recovery, preparedness, such as individual and household, organizational and community preparedness, and response, community response effectiveness. And last but not least, of course, we have Aris Masip, Aris has been the head of the Urban Resilience Department of Barcelona since 2014. She is currently working on the development of risk reduction assessment and implementation projects and tools, as well as the city's resilience strategy, and has a background in architecture and public space. Aris has been working for the Barcelona municipality since 2006 and was previously engaged in the urban regeneration project of District 22 through the coordination and development of public space projects and urbanization processes. So that's just a very sort of short overview of the panelists that we have here today. So as we get into the discussion, what we're going to do is start with Kyle, and Kyle Overley will give a few minutes to just sort of introduce the thoughts and the ideas about the future of emergency management. Kyle, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. And hello, everybody from the state of Maryland in the United States. I'm happy to be here today and share my thoughts on the future of emergency management. I think 2020 and 2021 showed us the power of the emergency management system and emergency managers, but it also illustrated some of our limitations as a field. Um, Living directly through the response to COVID-19, in Maryland, we had not only the response, we had hurricanes, we had political issues, we had snowstorms, we had a relentless year that taxed our staff and taxed our agency and emergency managers across the state in really ways we never had imagined. I think the last 2 years have challenged our assumptions. During COVID, our traditional support mechanisms for resource sharing and support just weren't there. Everybody in the entire nation and world was affected by this incident, and it kind of illustrated to us that we really needed to kind of take a step back and reinvest. And I think another big takeaway for our agency was just emergency management agencies and departments are not built for a year and a half long response. We're used to 3 to 4 months of a hurricane, including recovery, and then kind of moving on to the next issue. And 2020 and 2021 also showed us that there's a lot of areas where emergency managers are being asked to lead now that we hadn't in the past. I think traditionally folks look to us as the hurricane people, and when there's a natural disaster, we call on emergency management. But more and more, we're showing our value as emergency management and being asked to take on new and additional tasks. For example, our agencies led the response to the opioid crisis in Maryland. We applied the incident management system and process to that acute emergency. We're also leading new resilience work groups related to food insecurity, which was a direct outcome of COVID-19, as well as coordinating in other areas. We're directly involved right now with the resettlement efforts across the nation, and a number of really exciting things for emergency managers, where we're not just the hurricane people anymore. We're folks who our elected officials, other agencies really lean on, because we know how to get people to the right room. We know how to make them talk to each other in a way that's meaningful, and we can solve complex problems. So I think there's a lot of implications from 2020 and 2021. Certainly, it was incredibly challenging for our field as a practitioner, but there's a lot of opportunity. I think right now we have an incredibly powerful policy window, and we have the attention of our elected officials. So, for example, during the last legislative session in Maryland, our agency was promoted to a principal level department, directly reporting to the governor. So we're now actually the Maryland Department of Emergency Management, which is a really encouraging trend that we're seeing across the nation. More states, more local emergency managers are moving to that principal department kind of level, where we're being respected and we're being called upon to solve these complex issues. So it's very exciting and a good time for emergency management. I think another takeaway, I'm sure the other panelists will talk about, is the need to continue to invest in the next generation of emergency managers. We need people who have the right skill sets, people who can write well, who can solve problems, who can think critically. And, I need people who I can put in front of our governor or in front of an elected official, because you never know when you're going to be called upon to give a briefing to somebody. COVID was a great example of this. We had new staff working mass vaccination sites, giving tours to state senators and members of Congress. So I always think when I'm interviewing somebody, like, can this person present to the governor tomorrow? I always say, I can train anybody to be an emergency manager, but I can't teach you how to write well and speak effectively. So we need to continue to build the next generation, looking for people with those skills and people from a diverse background in terms of cultures, experience, education, because when we build organizations that look like the communities we serve, we're that much stronger. A couple other big takeaways from 2020 and 2021 is building programs that are equitable and are survivor centric, and kind of breaking down some of those traditional barriers that we run into as government. We were very successful in leveraging the private sector during the COVID response, and I think that's going to be even more critical as we move forward into our new and complex disasters that we're going to face. And then finally, and kind of most importantly, is prioritizing disaster risk reduction and resilience. So in our agency, we think disaster risk reduction is so important that it's on par with traditional emergency management type activities, those consequence management, response, and recovery roles. So everything we do in our department, it falls into one of two buckets. It's either consequence management, which is, again, responding to disaster during an acute emergency, or disaster risk reduction, using that same emergency management system that we use during acute emergencies, but to get other agencies together to tackle these complex issues of resilience. So moving forward, as our disasters get more complex, as climate change exacerbates, all of the things we're doing as emergency managers, as we're looked upon from our elected officials to respond and coordinate novel threats and new things that we never thought we would be involved with, we got to prioritize disaster risk reduction, or we're just not going to survive as a field. So I would wrap up my remarks by saying that's the most critical thing we can do as emergency managers, is move away from that traditional response mindset and focus more on the disaster risk reduction. And that's what the future of this field is. It's finding smart people, getting them excited, and making a real indent to making our communities better. And then on the back end, being ready to respond and recover efficiently. So with that, Kyle, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Kyle. Thanks a lot. Really appreciate the insights there, and especially with regards to reflecting sort of the role of the community in that piece. And so, Lucy, if we were to turn to you, and you've done a lot of work, and you've talked extensively sort of about recovery and renewal and things like that. What is sort of your vision that you're seeing today in terms of what the future may hold for emergency management?
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to me. Completely agree with Kyle on his key points there. I think it's a very interesting time for the field overall, and generally quite a hopeful time as well. There was just a few points really that I had. One was that we can sometimes, I think, as emergency managers, or a phrase I've learned from the French this week, anticipatory planners, overemphasize the way that the world will change because of this disaster. So we can feel like everything will be changed for the next time, but actually history shows us that it probably won't. So something for us in this field to have to continuously come to terms with is sometimes how little things change. In the UK at the moment, and I will put in the chat various reports, we are no doubt overhauling a lot of our emergency management machinery. There was a very critical report in Parliament, but what's interesting is I'm used to reading disaster reports that are very critical for one nation at a time. I can see them popping up all over the place in different jurisdictions saying the same things. So we've got very critical reports, we've got some great think tank papers, we've got lots of energy around our machinery. One of my sadnesses is that the government response to that is to create lots and lots of new shiny technology and data centers, and we've launched a national situation center because surely that will be the answer. And of course, in my writing, I'm a big fan of people like the sociologist Lee Clark, and I wish we were more honest about our limitations rather than next time we'll be shinier and we'll be faster. So I think what you'll see in the UK is a lot of machinery reform, but possibly not enough analysis of the humanistic factors in what we perhaps need to change. The other thing that I think it's provoked a big debate for us in emergency management here about the future is none of our top risks in the country's national risk register has a zero death option. So flooding, for example, on the scale that we last saw in 1952, very likely with climate change, is a 52,000 death toll. We have death toll, it's an open document, we have death toll as part of the narrative that describes the risk. For an influenza pandemic, we had a predicted death toll of around 800,000. I think what the pandemic is really showing us is that that is not shared by the public. So we as risk reductionists, but also risk analysts, risk writer about, risk authors, perhaps is a better way of describing it. You know, I've been writing the description and the blurb that sits with the National Risk Register for 20 years. And I don't know that I'd given enough thought, even as a scholar in mass fatalities and pandemics, to the idea that for the public, perhaps in both the US as well as the UK, there was an expectation of zero death and thus zero risk. And is that practical, for example, when we live so close to, say, a nuclear facility or to a major power station? So I think for me, I haven't resolved that in my mind, but it's certainly something that I'm challenging with colleagues at the moment in government, is when we collect and collate our risks, what are we looking for? And to build on Kyle's point, what are we reducing to? You know, so I think our field has been really boosted and bolstered this month by the publication of Disasterology by the wonderful Sam Montano, and that's saying, you know, that's a real call to action in terms of climate change risk reduction. How many consequences are too many? You know, this is an interesting debate for us. And I remember the Department for Homeland Security coming to do a guest keynote in the UK and saying, you know, one of the first questions in aftermath management is to ask yourself, what does good look like? So that's an interesting place to start. The other thing, and I'm delighted because I've just realized that it's Jessica Jensen, who I think probably went to the bar with in 2008. That's the cocktail bar, not the legal bar. We were on a panel together. So I'm not going to, I think that's 13 years ago at Emmetsburg on the future of education in emergency management. It's so, I suddenly realized that connection. And of course, that was one of the highlights of my career, not just meeting Dr. Jensen, but also that particular conference. Hello! I've just realized that. And when I was saying, all week I've been thinking, I know Jessica Jensen. And then I realized we were on, I think, 2 panels. And that was such a great conference, as Emmetsburg always is. But that seemed to be a particularly energetic one. But also, as all emergency management conferences are, if you think about where we were in 2008, it was reflecting on your very, very painful lessons. You were 7 years into the aftermath of 9/11. You were 2.5, 3 years into the aftermath of Katrina. And so that was, as all emergency management events are, there is a hope that comes from the enthusiasm, but there's a pain that comes from the lived experience. So I really viscerally remember that conference. And of course, one of the themes at Emmetsburg, as it often is the educating of young planners. And I went into a real kind of mother hen mode, I think, at the start of the pandemic about navigating colleagues through this phase. I have quite an unusual path into this. I'm very specialized specifically in things like death, disaster victim identification, the return of personal effects, but it also found a particular niche in that and its link to recovery. So it's not necessarily a usual path. And I'd also invested a lot personally in an academic education alongside a practice response. So I have an active responder role, but I'd also studied for a master's in disaster management and a PhD in medicine. I didn't sleep much in my 30s. And what I would say about that was, it made it very difficult, I think, for in the UK, you often, many other countries have more formal programs, but in the UK, we've never really nailed down our training and educational structure. And I'm not going to rest until we have. So sort of my final point really is a sort of a plea, a call for clarification, perhaps maybe standardization around our future. Because a lot of the risks that we talk about, we won't be here to necessarily manage a community through. I'm a child of disaster. I was very affected by disaster growing up. That's what When the Dust Settles is about. It's out in March, and it's my experience of growing up in a community that is blamed for its own disaster. And what I'm really interested now in is how do we take those 17-year-old activists like I was very, very lucky to have been born in the city of Liverpool and have teachers who said, you get out there and you study law, you study politics. So my first degree is in law. What are we doing with our activist children to ensure that they become both the emergency planners, but also, as Kyle rightly says, the disaster risk reducers of the future? So that's my overarching aim.
That's really interesting, Lucy, and I like your sort of your perspective there. We're talking about, we believe coming out of the pandemic, and we believe coming out of all the sort of experiences that we've had over the last 20 months, that the fact that everything needs to be revolutionized, and maybe that's not just necessarily the case. Maybe it's an issue of actually it's an evolution and not a revolution in terms of what we need to do in the field of emergency management. And in that case, I also think that there's the issue of education, which you mentioned. So I'm glad to hear that you also know Jessica, but I think that's a great segue over to Jessica to hear your thoughts in terms of what does education mean, especially when, Kyle was saying also, you can sort of train in the field of emergency management. How are we building these additional skills that come into this, say, really sort of politicized environment that we're working with, and the number of interlocutors and agency partners we're working with now? How has sort of the dynamic changed in the last 18 to 20 months for you?
So first, thanks, Kyle, for having me, and Harold as well. It's an honor and a privilege to be among such an esteemed panel, and thank you to all the folks attending today. I really treasure opportunities to get together with like-mindedly concerned people and passionate people, and I am both concerned and passionate. And that really hasn't changed at all in the last couple of years. In fact, we were asked to consider coming into today's panel what we think the standout lessons of the last couple of years or these recent disasters have been. And for me, that can really be summed up in 3 exclamations. Ugh, ach, and duh. Yeah, that's it. Like, that's everything. Ugh, because here we are again, hearing about the same kinds of response issues, are looking at the same kinds of recovery challenges, and seeing once again that all signs point to our ability to have done things dramatically differently, to have reduced the negative impacts to people and communities and organizations had we just engaged in addressing root causes through risk reduction, mitigation, protection, prevention, whatever kind of language you want to use to describe where our opportunities lie, where they have always laid. It is incredibly, insanely frustrating to be here again, saying the same thing and coming up with the same thoughts. It is true that in the United States, our emergency management infrastructure, emergency managers at all levels of government have been called upon to do more, and to do more in really similar conditions that they've been asked to do so in the past, meaning in an under-resourced environment where the risk salience is typically not high. And so they are overtasked and overburdened day to day. And then you get to this situation where the focus is continually on consequence management, and it reinforces the patterns of the past. Whereas Lucy said, we're kind of focused on reaction and fixing machinery out of these events. And political support really is there for us to continue doing that. Meanwhile, the problems of the past, the current, and the future lie not in the consequence management, but as Kyle and also Lucy suggested, in mitigation, risk reduction, vulnerability reduction, and paying more careful attention to how we navigate the challenges, but also the opportunities of recovery. And it's in those 2 spaces that we are really lacking in the United States across the board. like across the board. And I applaud the fact that we have some new mitigation funding available in the United States. I applaud that more funding is going into public health and paying attention to pandemic concerns than previously. These are good things. They are in and of themselves not sufficient things. The future really does lie in education. I'm sure you're shocked to hear me say that. It lies in training and education. And that's where we've really been coming up short. And we've been doing it for a really, really long time. And I say that with the utmost humility. But also out of recognition that a lot of people around the world, in fact, have been working really hard to increase the amount of education available to inform the folks who will go on to do this work in emergency management and related fields. There have been Herculean efforts from many and many places. All continents have emergency management like degree programs at this point. We see them in everywhere from Zimbabwe to several in Turkey, Tanzania, Togo, Venezuela, Colombia. I mean, the list goes on. The world is paying attention. Scholars are paying attention. Practice is paying attention. And while in general, that is a positive development to see more folks focused on these issues in more places from both sides where we can support one another, meaning academia and practice, we are in some ways undercutting our efforts currently. If the issue set that we face is that we're doing some things to the exclusion of others, then we need to have a better and more holistic, comprehensive approach to how we study and communicate about these topics. We have to, in fact, prepare the field for the work that they will do and the knowledge that's related to the work that's expected, this consequence management. But in order for us to expand, we really need to evolve our education to be inclusive of things that others associate with vulnerability or resilience or capacity building, mitigation, recovery. These are the different kinds of words that are used to capture these topics around the globe. We need to see that holistic treatment within curriculum. And that really does require that on our side in academia, we get out of our own way. We let go of hubris. We let go of the arrogance. We eliminate the disciplinary silos that we were, in many cases, trained into, and embrace humility and exploration and creativity and energy in tackling these problems, which really require that we adopt a transdisciplinary approach and communicate in that way. At the same time, around the world, academia needs to foster, where it doesn't already exist, a much stronger relationship with practice. And practice is where the domain of training would normally lie. And we have to be able to start to identify very clearly where each is contributing so that we pass off, as Kyle said, I can take anybody and then I can give them the emergency management stuff. So what is it that we can uniquely provide in academia that allows this more comprehensive understanding from the moment you're hitting the ground? And where is it that training needs to come alongside and we support one another to make sure that those technical skills are present? Because the reality is, even while attention is being paid to emergency management at this moment in the United States, that policy window Kyle mentioned, maybe some initial increase in funding, is going to go away very quickly. So we have to own the future in emergency management of what we are and how we contribute. And we have to figure out how to do more, even with less, right? Even in a more complicated environment. And I actually find this incredibly, incredibly exciting because, at least here in our context, emergency management has the benefit of history. So these positions and offices have been around since the 50s. They exist in all of our local level government unit called counties here. So they are positioned, they have history. And while being under-resourced, if we can do better on our end, if we can share that transdisciplinary knowledge in these more comprehensive pictures, I really do believe that we can meet these challenges of the future. But until then, I think we're just doomed to repeat the problems of the past.
Thank you, Jesse. Yeah, that's very interesting. And we often, when I was working in NATO as a civil emergency advisor, we always had these discussions about what happened to the era of civil defense, right? Where did everything go? We are talking about these issues 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, And it's actually like, where was that knowledge back then? Everything's sort of been destroyed. It's been lost. It's been gone, and none of that has remained. And so it really comes into, I think an issue of appreciating of, like you said, sort of the duh piece of it, and all this stuff we know already to a certain extent, right? All this stuff we just haven't been able to enact and to actually invest in and do it properly. And so it's getting more to this risk reduction piece, to reducing the hazards and reducing the vulnerabilities and working with the communities. And this is where, Aries, I think I'd like to come to you in terms of working in Barcelona and the work you're doing in terms of creating urban resilience. What are you seeing in terms of your perspective? Mm-hmm. And especially from your office and where you're sitting?
Yeah. Thank you, Kyle, and good afternoon, everybody. Actually, just to set the stage, our work in the resilience department or function is not directly emergency management. This is the Department of Civil Protection is in charge of that. But our mandate is to mainstream resilience across the organization. So incorporating resilience criteria and risk management in municipal operational management, planning, and transformation processes, especially on a proactive and prevention basis. So the way we understand resilience is as a continuous improvement process that goes from risk management, which is immediate response and recovery, minimizing the impact, and assuring the functional continuity of urban services. Then risk management to better understand our vulnerabilities, our capacities, improving our self-knowledge, and also on the capacities that we have to respond to this risk, and also better understand the risk that we are exposed to. And finally, implementing risk reduction projects in order to improve the situation that we had before this crisis. So this is a continuous improvement process. And our function is actually based can be summarized in these last two, in promoting these last two stages. So we take a proactive approach to resilience, to risk management, and this is a timeline of the risk that we've had over the last two decades, and we can extract some conclusions from them. So in the beginning, we had more risk related to affecting critical infrastructures and services of the city, and more recently, they are shifting towards more social sort of risk, and also extreme weather events. And we can extract some conclusion from this evolution, and also from the response that we have given to the different sort of risk. The first one was that this first sort of risk, like droughts, the blackouts that we have affecting critical infrastructures of the city. The first learning or conclusion that we had is that we needed a change in paradigm in the way we approach the solutions. We needed to work more cross-sectorially because all this, we needed to integrate this systemic thinking, this complex systems thinking, because the infrastructures and the different urban services and systems were interconnected, and they were not being managed with this perspective. So this was one of the first knowledges that we had, and that we integrated when we started working in resilience, when we incorporated the resilience program in the municipality. Second is that we need to think in the long term. We have, as we see, we've had recently very severe extreme episodes, such as the storm surge in 2020, just 1 month and a half before the pandemics. And also in 2018, we had 4 of the most intense rainfall episodes out of the 30 since 2095. And the climate projections say that this will be even more intense and frequent in the future. So we need to consider these future climate scenarios. Also, as I was saying earlier, we're having more of social vulnerabilities, and they have also been exacerbated by the pandemics. And these sort of stresses require a very structural response, as well as climate change. Another one is that we need to embrace uncertainty, because we don't know what may come next. We have experience, we know what we are prone to. We have this sort of climate. We know that we suffer from droughts every once in a while. We suffer from also intense rainfall episodes, but we didn't expect 2 years ago to be having to deal with a pandemic. So we don't know what the future will look like and what will hit next. So we need to understand also building resilience as building a capacity to respond to whatever sort of risk may come. And directly linked with this is also flexibility. That's something that we learned from the COVID, is that we need to be very flexible. We need to be agile in the response, and we need to be flexible. And for instance, being able to reconvert municipal sports facilities into support pavilions for the hospitals, that were the ones that were located more close to them, was something that we need to do, and that is an example of this flexibility that is required in any emergency management. So just jumping to the last part of the presentation, just to illustrate some of the things that we're working on and that somehow the COVID has also triggered. These are some of the working lines that we are now implementing. One of them is the Municipal Resilience Committee, and this is a task force to complement instruments for immediate response. So we have, as also Kyle was mentioning in his presentation, we have the instruments, we have coordination bodies for the immediate response, but maybe we need also to have some sort of analog bodies and instruments for to try to extract or not to lose what we have learned and the conclusions from the critical events that we've been having to manage. So that we can prioritize and identify these sort of resilience projects that are more with a more proactive and risk reduction project approach. Another thing that we are working on is in the register, the record of the critical events that we have, to see what sort of risks are we facing. Do they come from the infrastructures, as in the beginning when we started working in the resilience program, or are they more natural events or social? So we are keeping a record in a systemic way of the events that we have and the impact they are having as well. We want to capture, taking the systemic approach that I was mentioning before, what has been the impact? What have they affected? What of the in a very general way? What has been? What services and infrastructures in a roadway have they affected, and to what extent? So we are also implementing our working methodologies, or our impact analysis methodology, in order also oriented to what can we learn and what can we improve. So in the one hand, we want to assess what the impact has been and what the response has been parallel. Have we had a crisis that we could explain as a mismatch between the standards, the standards of the services and the impact that the crisis has had? Have we been able to meet the new needs or not? And on the other hand, also extract or learn and see what the opportunities and threats are, in order to detect these possible new projects to implement through the resilience boards. And just one last final conclusion, also regarding some knowledge, some learnings and findings from the COVID. I think that the local administration, we need to enhance this strategic risk management with this resilience lens that will allow the municipal actors to identify possible future scenarios, and also to build capacity in order to be better prepared for decision making when we're dealing with uncertainty and lack sometimes maybe of information, in a coherent and a coordinated way. And also not wasting these learnings and experience that we can extract from this crisis management, because they can also turn into an opportunity that we can apply in future emergencies and crises.
Okay, thank you very much. It's very interesting to see how you were sort of scoping out the problem, and you're looking at the wider systems and what that means. And to the previous point of different panelists, how do we action that? How do we actually implement those, the findings that we see and the steps that we need to take in order to build more resilient societies. I want to turn to Duncan really quick, because I know Duncan has to go, and then I'll turn over to Harold after that. So Duncan, did you have any thoughts you wanted to share before you have to go?
Thank you to all of the speakers for their wise words. One thing that I saw across the speakers that was very interesting was this focus on theory, with this focus on how do we train our emergency planners. And I work in a university, and one of the constant debates that we have is how much theory should be given to the students, and how much of that should be balanced very clearly with practice. So should we be turning students into critical thinkers? Should we be turning them into practice relevant managers? And what should be the balance of that? And I think the easy answer is always, well, yes, it should be a balance. It should be both. But I'm just wondering if our panelists have any further thoughts, maybe thoughts that would perhaps challenge that convention, to say, should we be teaching them about the theory of critical thinking skills, about how to think, about how to digest and take apart information? Or should we be giving them more of the practice relevant skills that some of the speakers have been talking a little bit about today? I'd just be interested to hear some of the panelists' thoughts around that at an appropriate time.
Okay, who would like to start? Jessica?
I mean, I can. Duncan, I think that's an excellent thing for us to talk about. And I see Kyle's ready to go too. I don't think that there's anything like balance in existence, right? Like we're always in search of equilibrium, and it never exists, not in like work-life balance, not in anything. We're always going to try and aspire to accomplishing balance in people, balance in professionals of any sort, right? And when we sit and we're operating from a particular perspective, mine is academia, right? We're going to always lean in one direction or another. And the reality is that in academia, we do certain things best. And in the training domain, which we have many of in the United States, I'm not qualified to do what they do. I'm not qualified to train as they train on the topics that they train. And so what I really do believe we need to see more of, truly, is that within the education domain in the United States, we need to stop trying to be both. Instead, we need to develop really strong partnerships with those in training institutions to clarify where each of us contributes to developing a whole professional, right? Someone capable of meeting the challenges of the future. And I think we've been attempting this in our context in the United States in a really self-defeating way, where a lot of these education institutions are trying to do both in ways that lead them from doing neither very well. And then we're producing people who reinforce the patterns of the past, walking into these difficult contexts they find themselves in. And they don't have the skills to be able to navigate those challenges any more effectively than people in the past. And so I really appreciate what you've said, Duncan. I really look forward to hearing others' thoughts on this. Mine would be that we each need to get clearer on where we both contribute, clearer on what is necessary for the future, and allow each avenue, the training partners and the education partners, to contribute uniquely. I'll toss it over to Kyle, though.
No, I agree with you. I think from my perspective, there's a training infrastructure in place, at least in the United States, through several venues. There's the Emergency Management Institute that provides training, emergency management training. There's other programs through Texas A&M, for example. Their extension service does training. There's a really big difference between training and education. And I think some of the programs, like Dr. Jensen had mentioned, are losing focus on what is the role of university versus what is the role of training. Me personally, as somebody who hires a lot of people, I don't really care so much what your degree is in, that you just have a degree in something. Because completion of an undergraduate degree is not just what your major is, it's all of the other courses and experiences and skills and underlying abilities that you develop through going through an undergraduate program or a master's program. So again, me as somebody who's, I have a undergraduate degree in political science and I have a master's in emergency management. It doesn't matter to me as somebody who hires people what your degree is in, just that you have it, because that's a critical component. Like I mentioned, I can show you where the emergency operations center is and teach you which colored vest to put on. We can train you for all those things, but I can't train you how to write well. And that's really what I need as an emergency manager and a leader in an organization.
Lucy, Iris, you like to comment?
So, I mean, for me, it's complete agreement. What else would there be, really? And that particularly, I think, that emphasis on the whole professional. And, you know, there's a couple of things with me. In my own presentation at the start, I gave a little bit of a hint into my own experience trying to build up a quilt, as I talk about it a lot, the quilt of what gets me to a level of experience. And also, I think, you know, it's something perhaps that's also very common to professional women. You write quite a detailed biography that reflects why you've got the professional skills, or alongside and/or an academic basis. You become, I think, if you're not careful, quite defensive of what makes that whole professional. So I think it's something that has really, really intrigued me. And what I've really done in When the Dust Settles is explained this hunger to really make sure that I could validate both a professional expertise and an academic expertise, and then how I combine the two. And that's certainly not something that I'm saying everybody can do. But what I'm saying is, I think there is a challenge about being a very open-minded academic, because sometimes what practitioners will demand is very different type of writing than's demanded in the academic world, and then being a very open practitioner. And there was one of the things I convey in the book is there was a point about the time I came to Emmetsburg, so the early 2000s, where a master's degree in emergency management was really desired by working professionals in things like emergency response and the fire service. They were very, very keen to go and get a master's degree. So we ran a number of postgraduate programs so that people could come and validate, and you were actually given credits for your experience in emergency management. But one of the problems we've had is that was usually paid for by work. And most of those programs have closed. So at the time I came to Emmetsburg in 2008, we were riding high on a system that had learned how to validate operational training programs and professional courses and give them credit towards a master's degree. And we came to Emmetsburg and we thought, my goodness, you know, FEMA's got even bigger institute than we're starting. This is great. And one of the sad things in the book, I think, is seeing that lost and eroded. So I'd really like to get back to that, where we found ways to give accreditation for practical and operational courses that allow people to access programs. And just on that point very quickly about critical reflection, literally just did a seminar this morning with the Irish government, and we were talking about how you get briefings into ministers during the pandemic, and really that ability to write a paragraph for and a paragraph against that only comes from being taught critical reflection. And I would completely agree with both speakers that it's whatever degree that is, that ability to write a critical paper. And one of the things I love about working with Ireland is they are much, much better than we are in England about valuing the placement of emergency management education within the university environment. So they've always been somewhere I've been drawn back to.
Thank you, Lucy. Iris, would you like to say something about this too?
Yeah, well, just very, very briefly. Well, I think critical thinking is basic in emergency management and for whatever, as well as common sense. And I agree with them that you don't probably need a specific degree because we don't know what we'll be dealing with, what the needs will be, and what. But I guess it's more related with certain sort of skills or I don't know, or sometimes even personal features. Jessica said in her presentation, she finds herself as committed and passionate, and I guess this is something that is required, and it has nothing to do with an academic degree. And also because risk management and emergency management is a constant learning process, because once you've learned to deal with something, then the scenario changes completely. So you need to be constantly preparing yourself.
Thank you all for answering to this. I like to raise one thing. We have some questions, and Jessica has also answered them. We can come back to that. But I like to bring the public into question, because we did see during the pandemic that how this was handled throughout the world depending on trust. So trust, the public's trust in the government and the handling of emergencies is very important. In Teams, we participated in a project back in 2000, it was from 9 to 13. It was called Asset. It was about risk communication, actually trust in communicating in the pandemic. And in that case, we found that participatory governance was a very important thing. How do you communicate with the public that they trust and follow your instructions? We have seen a lot of demonstrations around the world, and I think that dimension of education have also to go to the public. So how do any of you like to address that issue? How do you teach the public in this to really communicate with them? Would you like to address that issue, which I think is very important? Anyone like to start?
I didn't go there in my first part of the presentation, but I really thank you for asking it, because I think it's probably one of the biggest weaknesses in the UK at the moment, although we've got great work coming out of Manchester to transform it. I seem to remember it was another panel of various things I've attended with FEMA and Emmetsburg. We go through phases, I think, in international emergency management at thinking that we've cracked this and we're getting better at it. The other thing I think the pandemic has taught us is that we are all the public. And one of the most common questions that I get as a direct, interaction with me is from young students at the moment, 16, 17, wanting to work in some sort of field around emergency response, emergency management, emergency medicine. There was huge surprise when I gave a talk to a sixth form recently that there's bachelor's degrees in emergency management. But also a lot of requests that really took me back during the pandemic from things like dads and mums in families wanting to know if there were any courses on family plans and emergency plans, and is it done with the scouts? How is this done? And one of the things that I'm finding very difficult is our governments commit to it in the UK very sporadically. So they'll agree to a program and then pull it, and then agree to it and then pull it. Whereas a lot of other nations have more committed preparedness to community communication and learning. We've got another initiative just starting again on improving this within the community. But one thing I would always say is that, we are the community too, and we are the public too. So not an us and them, but also my personal passion is I'd like to see much more universities teach programs like this, and also open them out to citizen and community engagement.
Thank you for that, Lucy. And actually, all of us, we are first responders, and we have to learn to handle it. It takes time before anyone can help us. We had an incident in Norway yesterday. I don't know if you read about it. One guy in a city close to Oslo killed 5 people with a bow and arrow. And he was actually detected by the police, but he escaped and actually then started the killing. So how do the public handle a situation like that is important. Jessica, you also had some comments to Kyle and also answered Vinod's questions. So I give you the floor to do both. Please, Jessica.
Well, I don't want to talk too much. So what I'll do is just like start by responding to something that I had said that I'd love to talk to Kyle about. And actually, I was having a little private chat with Kyle on the side. So Kyle said a statement, which I know is true, right, for him. And I understand why he said it. And that is, I don't care what degree you have. I care that you have certain skills like the ability to think and write and speak and so on. And I know that that is a belief that is held by many, in fact, around the world. And I know that people come to their positions in emergency management or civil protection or whatever the titling is in the particular country from many, many different and diverse backgrounds right now that bring very valuable things to the table. That said, an emergency management degree or disaster resilience or whatever the naming is in your institution should be different. It should stand out and set the person apart from people coming out of other fields. The information is there. It is there to provide a radically different, holistic, comprehensive education that truly does provide an incredibly strong foundation for people entering the field and provides them the opportunity to contribute and to even approach their work in different ways from the past. The problem I see is that we are not delivering on that promise. We are not. And there are reasons we are not, but we need to get our poop in a group, pardon my phrasing. We need to get organized. We need to do better. And we need to approach this work with humility and respect for one another to identify this common core, this thing that can make us unique and contribute so that these degrees do matter. And so they can be complemented by experience and training in ways to get us to that whole professional. And we are failing now. And that's why Kyle will have, and others, many others have that perception. And we need to fix that. We need to fix that. And we need to fix it fast because the climate change trends that we're seeing and how they're playing out in the United States, much less globally, mean that we must. We must. I wanted to address something else that Lucy said, and then I'm going to stop so others can speak. And that is that one of the most powerful vehicles we have in education in the United States, and I can't speak to the higher education infrastructure elsewhere, but our students in the United States, when degree seeking at the undergraduate level, so at that first level, post-secondary level, they must complete some courses that are called general education. And I don't know that that exists similarly across the globe, but here at NDSU, we have 3 separate courses that students can take instead of psychology or economics or political science. They can take emergency management and have it fulfill requirements that students generally need to accomplish in order to graduate with any kind of degree. And that for us is a powerful vehicle. We are serving more than 70 different majors. That means students who are going to be civil engineers, mechanical engineers, construction managers, real estate developers, the folks who are going to be our biologists and our educators and our political officials, not just people who will go on to be emergency managers. And I think that that is not the solution for the future, but it is a solution that we're uniquely positioned to provide and really can enhance the education of the population as a whole so that some of the issues you raised, Harold, related to COVID might be avoided into the future.
Thank you, Jessica. I'm sure that Kyle like to comment, but I will add a little bit to what I said, because we have had, when we do conferences, we move it around the world. We were in Japan, we were in China, and China was thinking building training for the public. That means that it goes like to an amusement park where you really face what kind of risks you can face in the community, and that they can play with these things. And we actually went through such a training facility in Japan. What about US? And are you dealing with something like that, Kyle, in US?
Yeah. So again, I think there's definitely need on both sides, right? So educational programs, emergency management, whatnot, that are giving students a flavor of many other issues that are not just emergency management, are critically important to this field. So issues of economics or politics or things like that, these are all things that are we're involved with as practitioners in emergency management. And, like I mentioned earlier, we're involved in many issues that we were never involved with before. So, I think a well-rounded individual that understands the global context by which we find ourselves in, regardless if we're a local emergency manager or a state emergency manager, is critically important, understanding your environment. So, I see value in all types of degrees. And I think, again, like I mentioned earlier, the training infrastructure is in the United States very good through FEMA's Emergency Management Institute. And there's tons of opportunities that are generally cost-free for people to build on their theoretical academic backgrounds, and then in a kind of a real practical type application. So I think, I think there's a lot of value on both sides there. And I think the most effective emergency manager is a well-rounded individual who understands those broader contexts. And so, that's what we need to produce to make this field sustainable and for the next generation.
Thank you, Kyle. I'd like to pass it to Aris and ask, how do you communicate well with the Barcelona public? And do you take into account the possibility to communicate with them, giving you feedback on issues? Can you please address that, Aris?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Harold. Actually, we have participatory process, especially for city transformation programs, and I mean, it's something that over the last few years has been enhanced. But in the field of emergency management, and again, I'm not directly working in the civil protection, we'll be better positioned to work on this. But actually, one of the projects that we have with them within the context of the resilience committee that I was mentioning before is precisely on communicating risk to citizens. So it's an issue that it's still we need to work on, when we need to enhance, because also it has to go, I think personally, hand in hand with also building capacity, not just explaining risk, because you can lead to some sort of psychosis. I mean, depending on how you approach it. If you doesn't go hand in hand with explaining that each one of us is a responder, as you said before, and we can have the capacities and the ability to deal with this risk and give tools. It's quite a sensitive issue. And also, I think that integrating it into education, as Jessica was mentioning before, is an important piece. For instance, I haven't had in all my life first aid training, and I don't know, at some point I think it's interesting that each one of us has it, because you don't know when you're going to use it. So it's something that we definitely need to work on more. I mean, we're working in participatory processes and engaging citizenship regarding more general and more links to this. City strategies and transformation projects on the public space, but regarding emergency management, it's something that we definitely need to work on more. Yeah.
Thank you, Aris. We have some questions, and Jessica has been so nice that she has answered them, and all will also be covered in the reporting. But we are running out of time. But I have one question which I like you all to address as a ending of our session, and it comes from Nihat Konsinay from Kosovo. And he says, I have the impression that there is a permanent break in the coordination of support for the emergency areas. So the time factor in terms of response is often not taken into account. An impression which is not infrequently confirmed everywhere. This is a question he wants to address to all of you. So you can go around now. So we finalize by trying to address what NEAT concerns about. Who likes to start? Jessica.
The impression that there's a permanent break in the coordination of
That's right.
emergency management areas.
Yes.
I'm actually not entirely sure that I answer the question. Time factor in terms of response is not taken into account. I guess I'm really not. I could riff off and pretend I understand, but with humility, I will say I don't, and let someone else respond.
Let's see if yeah, okay, Jessica, that's okay. Let's see if Lucy would like to address.
I'm struggling similarly. I mean, all I would say is that if this is an area that NEAT is looking into, I would certainly agree that there are massive fractures and breaks in the way that emergency coordination is supported, and I probably am definitely riffing in the way that Jessica skillfully avoided. I never avoid a chance to go off on a tangent. And one thing I would say is, if you're interested in the time factor, I address that a lot in my writing, in the sense that I think what you mean there is with response and recovery, people underestimate the time that it takes. So very much I would agree with you there.
Thank you, Lucy. Come on, Kyle.
I'll jump in here. I think that the time issue is a significant challenge. I think if you look at the structures of public organizations, they're not always designed to be the most expedient day to day, and there's reasons that public organizations are designed the way they are. But the fact is, the speed and time that of which decisions need to be made, and resources, et cetera, need to be delivered during a disaster is much different than the structural composition of many public organizations. So it's definitely a challenge. And I would say part of that also is we need to design programs that are survivor-centric and focused on doing right by those impacted by disasters, as opposed to doing right by checking, organizational boxes. And if we approach the problem from the survivor first and then build programs working our way backwards, they can be much more effective.
I think you're right. Aris, you like to comment?
Well, yeah, like Jessica, I didn't quite understand the question, but I really don't think that the recovery time or in the response it's not taken into account. Another thing is that sometimes maybe we don't react as fast as we should or as it is expected. But I do. And in this case, in communication and coordination is very important, and having the bodies, the instruments that can help this coordination is something that also this recent last crisis, since they are so frequent, paradoxically, it has been enhanced as well, because now the emergency responders, they are more used to working together and getting close together and coordinating with each other. So
Okay, I think that what maybe it was not fully clear, the question, but I think what NEAT was addressing. I like to tell you an episode I had in Taiwan. I was talking with one of the professors at the university in Taiwan. We were out for tea, and he said that they have an indigenous group in Taiwan being there for ages, and they used to take care of themselves. They lived by fishing, hunting, etc., were very self-content. So the government then wanted to include them in the emergency responses. And the result was that they then felt they were should be taken care of and was waiting for the response. So it actually had a negative impact on how they lived before, that they slow down. So this, so I look at Neat's question as we, the public, we are the first responders. So we need to know how we should react, how we could help others. And that's the time phrase, because it takes some time before police or the first responders can reach you. We are over time, and there was a question at the end from Russell Dippy in Australia that he also wanted to see the questions. What happens, Russell, is that Kyle is taking all questions, giving all the answers, and the speakers will answer them afterwards. And you can find them on the LinkedIn page for this webinar. And I'd like to thank you all. And I would like to say one thing. I feel all of you have been passionate and dedicated. And I think that's the most important thing in emergency management. Thank you all, and have a good evening.